that agreements among competitors in restraint of trade are illegal. So that if you're a competitor in an area, the rule is simple. You have to compete. You can't agree with your competitors not to compete with each other in some way. You can't have that kind of agreement. And so the agreement itself is a violation. When competitors get together and agree on pricing or a bid, what they're going to do with their bid, it's very simple. You can't do that. You have to compete on price. You have to compete on bids. Price fixing, bid rigging, also customer and market allocation. Those are the three big areas. I'm going to be discussing and giving you some examples of each one of those. But those are the areas that are considered illegal in the United States and criminal. In addition to an agreement, there has to be some kind of interstate or foreign commerce. That's what makes it a federal violation. The products have to cross state lines somehow. And there's a statute of limitation of 5 years that's in place for this violation. Road building, in particular, has been a historic area where there has been a lot of activity, a lot of prosecutions, and in particular, in the 1980s and 90s, the Department of Justice prosecuted over 100 companies and individuals for bid rigging in this area, building roads in all the different states. And it was, as I'm told, I didn't work for the Justice Department at that point in the 1980s, but I've talked to people who were involved in those cases, and they said that there was so much bid rigging and collusion going on in this road building industry, these contractors getting together before the bids were let, that the Justice Department was opening investigations with no evidence. And they were finding the crime every time. It was interesting. I think Professor Paulo, before he left, communicated the message to Professor Claudio, okay, well, bring us some evidence and we'll look into it from the state prosecutor here. Well, that's normally, as a prosecutor, I was a DOJ prosecutor, that is normally how you start an investigation. Preferably, you like to have some evidence, and that's usually the way things started. But bid rigging was so prevalent in the road building industry in the United States that there were investigations in almost every state, Illinois, Florida, and the one in particular that I was referring to, my former colleague told me that he went to his bosses at the DOJ and said, listen, I'm in Texas. I don't have any evidence that there's road building collusion going on, but because it's happening in all these other states, I want to open an investigation. The Assistant Attorney General said, okay, and they prosecuted 29 individuals and companies. They found it. They knew it was there because it was so prevalent in all these other areas, all these other states. There have been many, many related investigations with collusion in this area, involving bridge construction, building construction, roofing, ready-mixed concrete that goes into the roads. There's a very recent one I'll tell you about in a minute. Metal building insulation, doors, pipe, plumbing, whatever you can imagine. Construction has always been an area of great concern for the DOJ because of the bid rigging and collusion that has gone on. This is the case I was just referring to, the most recent major investigation involving ready-mix concrete producers in Indiana. There was a $29.2 million fine, which is the largest domestic fine in the DOJ. DOJ has had many higher fines for international cartels, but as far as a U.S. domestic company and a domestic conspiracy, this was the largest, and it was a very long conspiracy involving the Indianapolis area concrete producers. They were allocating markets. They were saying, well, we're going to take this job when there was a bid because it's closer to our plant, our mixing plant. and you guys take that job because it's closer to your plant. And they were dividing and allocating the market and rigging the bids, deciding who was going to win each bid. 9 executives went to jail, and you're going to see what the jail sentences are like in just a minute. So back in the 1980s, these cases started, and as recently as 2007, 2009, the cases in these industries have continued. President Obama has promised aggressive action against cartels going forward, and the DOJ has followed through with proactive measures. We've trained 13,000 inspector generals, government procurement officers, auditors to look for competition crimes in connection with the money dispersed under the stimulus bill. And I'll give you some more examples, but it's interesting. The U.S. and Brazil are in a similar phase, if you will, in that in Brazil there's a lot of money that's going out to build infrastructure because of the explosive growth in the economy and the World Cup and the Olympics. The U.S. is also, the government's putting a lot of money out into the economy, but for different reasons, because our economy is faltering and we've had, as you know, a recession. And so in order to pump up the economy, the United States has introduced a stimulus bill to put $1 trillion into the economy. And so in light of all that money flowing out there, and a lot of it is going to go into infrastructure and road building and maintenance and repairing roads and bridges. A lot of our infrastructure needs repair. And so because there's going to be all these new public works out there, the DOJ is very concerned, and they're going out proactively and going to all the different agencies that are responsible for that infrastructure and saying, hold on a second, hold on. Before you let that money go, before you open your bids and take your bids in, we want to give you some training, and we want you to know, we want you to be very careful and look out for bid rigging. And I've brought, just as an example, the DOJ is putting out these little brochures and giving them to all the procurement officials and the people in charge of bidding to show them some red flags and things to be worried about or concerned about in the bidding process. And I'm going to go through some of these with you in just a moment. So I think that both of our countries are in a situation now where we need to be very careful. When you're doing a lot of activity, a lot of building, you're susceptible to collusion because there's a lot of money and there's a temptation to take more money than you're entitled to. Whoops. Okay. All right. So let me just talk a little bit about the different violations. Price fixing is pretty straightforward. It's when companies agree that they're going to charge the same price or raise prices, when they are going to eliminate discounts, when they're going to establish a minimum price or a floor price, or they establish a standard pricing formula. And just like in Brazil, it's a formal crime. In other words, as I said a little while ago, the agreement is the violation. The DOJ doesn't have to prove that it was successful. The DOJ doesn't have to prove that the prices actually went up. The DOJ doesn't have to prove that consumers were hurt or harmed. All the DOJ has to prove is that there was an agreement that was reached on pricing. And so the case that I handled before I left the DOJ, the big case was involving the airlines. And we discovered a cartel, a global airline cartel, and many, many airlines were involved. The Brazilian SDE had an investigation, and as I understand, it's still open. They've charged a number of individuals who worked for the airlines in the cargo industry. And what we found, and there were 22 airlines that pled guilty to a felony in the United States, and 21 individuals that were charged. There was a conspiracy involving companies, airlines coming together and setting fuel surcharges and on cargo. and agreeing on a formula to calculate fuel surcharges and security surcharges. And we also saw it in the passenger industry as well. We charged British Airways and Korean Air and ANA with passenger price fixing, again relating to surcharges, fuel surcharges, where the companies were coming together, and rather than competing, and it's okay for one company to say, okay, I'm going to have a surcharge, and it's okay even for the other company to follow and say, okay, well, if they're going to do it, I'm going to do it. But when they were communicating with each other and colluding with each other and having those discussions and the agreement, that was the violation of the law. Allocation agreements. And this gets in, I think this touches upon road building as well. You're dealing with allocating customers, territories, sales volumes, production volumes, market shares. And again, this is where, there's an agreement between competitors, and one says, you know what, you take that market, you take that state. I'm going to take this state. This is where my plant is. But let's agree, I'm not going to send my salespeople into your state. You don't send your salespeople into my state. And we won't compete with each other. And so that would also be a violation of the law. And then bid rigging, which I think is our main topic here, where there's an agreement in advance to manipulate the outcome of the bidding process. And generally, you have three types of bid rigging. You have bid suppression, where one company will agree not to bid. In other words, they would normally bid, but they agree not to bid. And usually they agree not to bid because, well, you say, well, why would they do that? They're losing out if they don't bid. Well, usually they're getting something in return. Either they're going to get a subcontract later, from the winning company, or they're going to get the next bid, or a bid in a different area, and the company that wins this bid agrees to not bid in the other bid. So there's some sort of quid pro quo involved between the co-conspirators. You have complementary bidding, and this is where the companies will agree to bid. They'll agree who's going to win, but one of the companies agrees to submit a comp bid. We would also call it a comp bid. And what that is basically a bid that's artificially higher than the winning bid. And so if you have a toll project, let's say an automatic toll, and it was going to go to the company that is going to offer the lowest toll, let's say hypothetically there were two companies involved and they agreed, well, company A was going to win and they were going to bid a toll at 6 reals. Company B is going to lose that bid. They're going to submit a complementary bid for 7 reals. Now, when the agency opens up the bids, they see, wow, we got 2 bids. One's at 6, one's at 7. This was a close one. These are competitive bids because the pricing is so close. When in reality, if the companies hadn't been talking to each other beforehand, they don't know what the other company is going to bid. So they might come in, the winning company might have come in with 4 reals because they were not sure whether their competitor was going to undercut them or not. So you have the illusion. You have the illusion of a competitive bid when you have a complementary bid, because usually it's kind of very close to whatever the winning bid is, but it's not real. It's not real competition. And bid rotation is another former common scheme where you might have the same bid and it comes up for letting every few years. One company will win it the first time. The next time it comes up, it's given to the next company. Or you'll have different bids and they take turns winning the different bids. Also could give the illusion of competition in terms of, wow, a different company won this time, so there must be competition here. When in reality, the companies got together beforehand and said, okay, now it's your turn to win this contract. So it's not really a competitive situation.